요즘처럼 기업을 바라보는 시선이 엇갈린 적은 없는 것 같습니다. 경제 발전의 주역으로 보고 있는 시선이 있는가 하면 반칙을 일삼다고 보고 있는 시선도 있습니다. 특히 새 정부가 대기업 개혁을 예고하면서 기업들은 바짝 긴장하고 있습니다. 과연 한국 경제에 있어서 기업들은 어떤 의미를 가질까요? 오늘 더 리더는 급변하는 경제 환경 속에서 한국 기업의 진로를 모색해본 국제 컨퍼런스죠. 머니투데이방송 글로벌 이슈 2017에 참석한 윌리엄 라저닉 메사추세츠 경제학과 교수님을 모시고 말씀 나눠보겠습니다. Professor William Lajonik, we are honored to have you to our interview program despite your busy schedule.
Oh, thank you.
You made a speech in the Global Issue 2017 hosted by MTN in Seoul. Your topic was the purpose of cooperation, value creation and value extraction. Would you briefly explain what the purpose of the cooperation is?
Okay. Well, the purpose of the corporation is to create value, to produce products that people want or need at prices that are willing or able to pay. And to do that, it has to produce these high-value products and make them available at affordable costs. That's the purpose of the corporation.
Yeah. And companies try to maximize their shareholders' value, MSB, but you are against the concept of the MSB. You say that the MSB is a theory of value extraction, not value creation. What does this mean?
Okay, so if we go back to the purpose of the corporation, to create value, to produce high-quality, low-cost products that basically are the foundation of higher productivity in the economy, then we want to know how they do that. And the prevailing ideology, which is in the United States totally dominant, at least it only has been, however, since the 1980s, it wasn't before then, is that if you want an efficient economy, a prosperous economy, you should run it to create value for shareholders. Now, why do they argue this? They argue that everybody in a market economy gets a return on your labor or selling a product, but shareholders don't have a guaranteed return. And therefore, if there's a profit, which may or may not be the case, they're the ones who took risk. They therefore should get the profit and decide how to allocate it. If they want to leave it in the company, they can leave it in the company. If they want to put it somewhere else in the economy, they can put it somewhere else in the economy. Now that all sounds very logical, but there are some fundamental flaws. And they're basically two. That they're not the only ones who take risk. We hire workers, and they are working hard and smart to try to create products that will sell in the future, or sell the products even that we have now. They're taking a risk that the company will not be successful, and if the company is not successful, they won't have a return. And of course, it's not a matter of just getting paid today. People need to work, for 40 years and make good money. And this is where this occurs in the company. So workers take risk. Also, as taxpayers take risk. So I'm a U.S., I live in the United States. The United States taxpayer supports business through investment in infrastructure, in knowledge, all kinds of subsidies. If business isn't successful, we don't get our return. But if business is successful, we have a right to that return. So we take risk. Then when you look at shareholders, shareholders are basically households that have savings that buy and sell shares. They don't actually invest in companies, these public shareholders. In fact, that's when companies go public, the private equity holders exit from their investment. So they don't take that much risk at all, particularly with a liquid stock market, because anytime they want, they can sell their shares. So the ideology of shareholder value does not really understand the value creation process and who, in fact, takes risk in the economy, and therefore who should get a return in order for the economy to be prosperous, because we want people to work hard, smart, and look to the future, both taxpayers, workers, and that's basically what's wrong with the ideology.
Yeah, but some people say that the U.S. stock market could be vitalized because of the emphasis on the shareholders' value, and the venture companies in Silicon Valley also have grown on the basis. What do you think about this opinion?
Well, I think that certainly there is a role for the stock market, and the role is actually to separate ownership from control, or separate control from ownership. So really, the way venture capital works is that you put your money directly into a company, and then the stock market lets you get your money back. Now, before the creation of NASDAQ, which was 1971, which is a much more speculative stock market at the time than New York Stock Exchange, the listing requirements of the New York Stock Exchange made it very difficult to have venture capital, because it would take too long to be able to exit from the investment, to do an IPO, initial public offering. NASDAQ made it possible to have very low profitability, very low capitalization, and do initial public offering. Now, there's no doubt that attracted venture capital to invest in new firms. And so there is a role to play there. But the problem is, over time, the speculation often took over from the value creation. And so we have the dot-com boom, or in the United States now, we have all these biotech companies which need 10 years and billions of dollars to develop a product, and they go on the stock market with no product, and people are making money whether a product's produced or not. So it becomes problematic, even for venture capital.
In terms of the shareholders' value maximization, many companies buy back stocks to boost the stock prices. But you say that the buyback itself have a negative effect on the companies itself. So why is that?
Okay, so if a company has shareholders, these are people, households basically, that want to get a yield on their savings, and they can put it into government treasuries, shares. Okay, so they have it in shares. The way in which they should get the yield is through dividends. And dividends should be paid once the company has enough money to invest in the value creation process. But what happened from the mid-1980s in the United States, mainly because of changing rules of the regulator, Security Exchange Commission, they said you can do massive stock buybacks. And stock buybacks give a yield to people for selling the shares, not for holding the shares. And what's happened since then, and on an increasing scale, is that stock buybacks are not instead of dividends, they're on top of dividends. And companies are spending more than 100%, many companies, of their net income in dividends and buybacks, and not reinvesting in the company. And the beneficiaries of buybacks, it's not just simply people who sell shares, it's people who can time the selling of shares, because it's when the buybacks are being done that you can make the money. And the way buybacks are regulated in the United States, we don't actually know the days on which buybacks are being done. The other thing is they're massive. They became greater than dividends as a distribution to shareholders in 1997 for this S&P 500 companies, some of the largest companies in the United States. The net equity issues is minus over $4 trillion for the last decade. So it can be $500 billion, $600 billion per year is going to the stock market more than is coming from the stock market into companies. And so this is just a way of living off the past, of extracting value without creating value.
And as you know, the income inequality is one of the most serious problems most countries face in the economy these days. So what should we do to improve the income inequality?
Okay, so the first thing is to recognize that the distribution of income fundamentally occurs within business corporations, not by supply and demand of the labor market or not by government policy, but by people getting a job, learning how to do the job better, making the company productive, and then getting the job year after year and higher earnings. Now obviously if you employ people and they don't become more productive and you try to give them higher earnings, you're going to have a problem of the sustainability of the company. They're people and money and they reinvest in them and they share in the prosperity. And that's where a middle class comes from. Once you start breaking that relationship and you start saying all that money that's being generated by these companies belongs to someone else, and this is where stock buybacks come in because this is how they take the money out, you start concentrating income at the top, you eliminate the good jobs for people in the company. They might still be working there, but their wages don't go up, and then they also can be laid off very easily, even if they're productive. And you have a big problem of inequality in the economy. And that's basically, for the United States, which has one of the most unequal economies in the world in terms of income distribution, and gets worse all the time, I would argue that's the fundamental reason why, is because of this breakdown of retain and reinvest in companies. That's what I call the opposite is downsize and distribute. Downsize the labor force, you give all the money to shareholders, and this creates huge amount of inequality in the economy.
My next question is about something about the current condition of the U.S. corporations. In the early stage of the financial crisis, the U.S. manufacturers have the quite hard time that the GM had almost got bankrupt.
Yes,
yeah?
was bankrupt.
But these days, it seems they are restoring the competitive edge,
Yes.
and the companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Google are leading the era of the fourth industrial revolution. So what do you think this dynamics of your corporation is coming from?
Yeah, so if you take the second group, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they are, at this point in history, retain and reinvest companies. Okay, and they are able to do this in the case of Google and Facebook because they have dual class shares. So that there is a very small number of people who control the allocation of resources even though the company is listed on the stock market. And in fact, in the case of Google, which is not called Google anymore, it's called Alphabet, is because they had A and B shares. The A were traded on the market. The B is what the founders held. And the distribution of the A shares with votes was diluting the voting power of the B shares, the Brin and Page, who were the founders. So they started giving employees for stock-based pay C shares. And the C shares have no voting rights.
Oh.
Okay, so you have A, B, C. They changed the number to Alphabet, the name to Alphabet.
The holding company, right?
Yeah, the holding company. But that's the reason why. And a lot of people don't realize why they chose that name and made that change. And why is it a holding company? Is because through retain and reinvest, they now have so many different lines of business that they're building by reinvesting the money from one into another, that they're growing. In the case of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, the founder, there's no dual class shares, but he has been able to maintain control He has found a way to maintain control and now is hugely profitable. But the company with the most R&D absolute number is now Amazon. Amazon has about $13 billion a year in R&D expenditure. It's the top of the list. So it is a company that's really investing still for the future. And it's, as a result, its main profitability center is now cloud computing, not so much the retail. The retail is very thin margins. The cloud computing is very lucrative. Then when we look at some of the more established companies, we have to look actually at them individually and how are they surviving in a context where there is all this pressure on management, including pressure they put on themselves because of the stock-based pay to distribute. And you mentioned General Motors, so it's a very good example. So between 1986 and 2002, General Motors, when it was in heated competition against the Japanese and then the Koreans and the Germans, they did over that period $20 billion of stock buybacks. So I did a calculation that if they had just got a 2.5% after-tax return on that money, when they went bankrupt in 2009, they would have had the amount of money that the government used to bail them out. Okay, so that's the first thing, is that it then was the government that came in and bailed them out because they, if they had failed, there would have been not just the employees at General Motors, but the whole supply chain. That would have been a problem. They have since recovered, partly because it's now clear that if they don't have competitive products, they can't survive. So I think it did focus management. But also, General Motors, along with Volkswagen, is the biggest producer and seller of cars in China. And so China has been an important part of General Motors' survival. And even now, its survival is in doubt over the long run, in my view, because now that it's making profits, the hedge funds have come there and demanded money and have been getting huge amounts of stock buybacks. They've been saying, if you don't give it to us, we'll put people on the board, etc. So they're under this pressure all the time. And every company is facing this pressure, and different companies, depending on the industry they're in, the global competition, where they're located, in this case, having all these sales in China, they handle it in different ways. So you can't say one thing about any one company and say, well, this is, but there is this tremendous pressure not to invest for the future among these companies.
Yeah. And from now on, I'll ask you some questions about the Korean companies.
Okay.
As you know, the large companies have been doing very well in global market, but the Korean medium and small firms are not that globally competitive. So, how do you evaluate the Korean large companies? And then, can you give us some advice on reinforcing cooperation between the large companies and the small and mediums?
Yeah. Okay, so virtually every successful economy is driven by large companies. Why is that? Because to become successful, small companies grow large.
Yeah.
So the Silicon Valley model, which people think of as small and medium-sized enterprises, only works because some of those small enterprises grew to be large and created platforms. So at one point, Apple was just, not that long ago, 40 years ago, in a garage. 2 people and then 10 people in a garage. Then it now is tens of thousands of people and one of the most successful companies in the world. But it's making available through the smartphone and through its products a lot of opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprise, particularly small enterprises, to do apps. Okay, and so there's certain things, particularly with software, where you can use that platform. Amazon, for example, which we mentioned, through its original business bookselling, now people who are used booksellers are not confined to a particular location where the customers have to be in the location. Those books are available to the world. So they are small enterprises. but they are given a platform by these larger enterprises. So that's the other way to think about it. And when you think about it that way, you have to even go back in history and say, how did those platforms get developed? And in the case of the internet, it was because the US government invested in the internet for decades before it was commercialized in 1993. And even though it's been so successful, this is very important, even though we now know how successful the internet has been as a business proposition, in order for business to be able to be successful, then there's a lot of opportunity for small business. Some of those businesses will grow large. Some of them will create the platform. The other model comes out of, it's best known in Italy, what they call the Third Italy, where local governments have supported mainly in light industry that requires a lot of quality and skill, lots of small firms to be working in a region and helping develop the region.
네, 지금까지 윌리엄 라저니 교수님 모시고 한국과 미국의 기업들이 안고 있는 다양한 이슈들에 대해서 짚어봤습니다. 교수님은 기업의 가치 창출 그 역할을 강조하셨고 또 주주가치만을 극대화하는 전략은 기업에 부정적인 영향을 미칠 수 있다고 강조했습니다. 멀리 미국에서 오셔서 오늘 더 리더 출연해 주신 윌리엄 라저니 교수님 감사합니다. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.